Hey, this is Dave Glander with Reasons for Hope, and I am excited to be coming to you with part 4 of this Eschatology series, which just means the end times, talking about the end time stuff. Little confusing because this is part 1 of who is the Antichrist. There'll be 2 parts to that. That'll be part 4, and part 5 will be who is the Antichrist. So let's just break right on into it. Well, let me pause for a second. I just want to be clear, and I've said it before, prophecy is unknown to everybody. I don't even care how big an eschatological teacher you are or studier. We don't know exactly how it's going to work out until after it's come to pass. And so I'm willing to be corrected on any of this. And actually my view on the Antichrist, which I've held for about 20 years now, is a slightly different view than the traditional view. And you're going to see what that means. And so I just want to always preface that with eschatology, we need to be careful about dying on hills because we just don't know. But we've been given some really good clues, and I think a good student of Scripture can piece together a pretty good picture. So let's dive right into it. Who is the Antichrist? Glad you asked that question. I want to go to Gog of Magog real quick because it's interesting to me that Ezekiel 38 talks about him. It says, "The word of the Lord came to me, son of man, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. Prophesy against him and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against you, O Gog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal." And so we talked about that in part 2, a little bit about the war of Ezekiel 38 and 39 and how God is going to use Gog of Magog in that, and that Magog is actually up in Istanbul, Turkey, and all that stuff. So we kind of unpacked that a little bit. But what's interesting to me is we go to Revelation, and at the end of Revelation chapter 20, it says, "When the 1,000 years are over, Satan will be released from his prison and will go out to deceive the nations in the 4 corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them for battle." Gog and Magog show back up. So when we're looking for clues about the Antichrist, we need to be looking at the total picture and not just some passing phase that's going by or an opinion that's going by about a particular scripture. Gog of Magog plays an important role, not just in the war leading up to the Great Tribulation, or even part of, but it's also at the end of the 1,000-year reign, the millennial kingdom that we talked about in part 1 of this. And so it's important to understand those 2 pieces. So moving right along, Daniel gets this vision, and it's pretty unique and it's pretty clear. It's in Daniel chapter 2. He says, "You looked, O king, and there before you stood a large statue, an enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance." And what he's doing is he's interpreting the king's dream that he had. "The head of the statue was made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them." And so it's a very interesting prophecy that Daniel's looking at as the kingdoms leading up to the Rome and then the final kingdom. We know Babylon is the gold head, Medo-Persia is the silver, Greece is the bronze, Rome is the iron legs, and then the feet. This is where it gets a little bit funny because the feet are actually mixed of 2 elements that don't really blend well together. But my favorite part of that is a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. And that to me is a picture of the coming of Christ and the second coming when he comes back to judge the nations that have come against Israel. And so Daniel goes on to say this. Daniel said, "In my vision I looked, and there before me were 4 winds of heaven churning up the great sea. 4 great beasts of different, each different from the others, came up out of the sea." And so I want to focus on what he says about those 4 beasts. And we go and we continue reading. He says, "The first was like a lion, and it had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a man, and the heart of a man was given to it." So Daniel's first beast is, he says it looks like a lion, okay? His second beast, it looks like this. "And there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and was told, 'Get up, eat your fill of flesh,'" right? The third beast that Daniel sees, now keep in mind, these beasts are all kingdoms that are being represented here. The third beast, he said, "After that I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard, and on its back it had 4 wings, like those of a bird. The beast had 4 heads and was given authority to rule." And this is where it starts to get good. He says this, and after that in my vision I looked, and there was before me a fourth beast. This one, he goes on to more explanation though. He says, it was terrifying, frightening, and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured the victims. It trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. And so we're starting to get this picture of what this is. Well, we know in Daniel when he says lion, we know the lion equals Babylon. There you can even go into history and archaeology and see that the lion was a symbol of the nation of Babylon, okay? And you can see right there in that red, that is the area that Babylon mostly controlled, okay? The second kingdom that came after Babylon, technically it was Egypt, Assyria, but Daniel starts with Babylon because that's where Daniel was. So he doesn't focus on Egypt and Assyria as the main kingdoms. He starts with Babylon because that's where he's writing from. The second one was Medo-Persia, and it was like the shape of the form of a bear. And again, the bear is one of the national statuses of the Medo-Persia reign. Okay, the third beast is Greece, and Greece, we know, has the national symbol of the leopard. And so all of these things that Daniel was seeing, he was looking forward. Babylon, Medo-Persia was coming after that. Greece was coming after that. And then the fourth dreadful and terrible one was the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire, and if you'll notice about those red areas, each one of them took over the area and actually expanded on the area that their former kingdoms had control of. But what's interesting is this. We go to John's Revelation, and John's looking backwards in time. And so John says this, I saw a beast coming out of the sea. It had 10 horns, remember 10 horns. It had 7 heads and the 10 crowns on his horns, and each one had a blasphemous name. The beast I saw, now get this, he says, the beast I saw, a leopard, but had the feet of a bear and a mouth like a lion. The dragon gave beast to the power of his throne and great authority. Daniel sees going forward a lion, a bear, and a leopard because he's looking forward in time from Babylon on. John is in the Roman Empire now during the Roman rule, and he's looking backwards, and so he actually says them in backwards order: leopard, bear, lion. And so we know leopard, Greece; bear is Medo-Persia; lion is Babylon. It's interesting to me that Daniel looking forward says them in one order, John looking backward says them in a different order, talking about these same kingdoms. The beast was given a mouth to utter proud and blasphemous, proud words and blasphemies, and to exercise his authority for 42 months. He opened his mouth to blaspheme God and to slander his name, and this is the important part, and his dwelling place, and those who live in heaven. So for 42 months, the beast was given authority over to reign on God's dwelling place, right? That was when that was to take place. This is very interesting because remember, John's looking backwards in time. And so what we need to do is we need to take our Gregorian calendar and break it down into lunar days, because the Jewish people run on a lunar calendar. We run on a Gregorian calendar. Ours are 365.25 days per month. That 25 is for the leap year that comes every 4 years. We've got leap year, and that's because we've got technically a 0.25 in there, and we just celebrate an extra day in February on the 4th year. So 365.25 divided by 12 equals 30.43 days. When we take 30.43 days and we multiply that by 42 months, we have 1,278 days. Well, days and years are synonymous in the Bible. When God talks in Ezekiel about lay on your left side for 70 days or for 40 days, that represents each year. Each day represents a year. It's a common theme that when God says for a day, it equals a year. Okay, so if we calculate the days and years, 1967 AD was when Jerusalem, we talked about that in the last session, when Jerusalem was captured finally by the Jews after nearly 2,000 years, well, more like 3,500 years if you really want to get technical about it. But if we take 1,278 years and subtract that from 1967, we get down to 689 AD. Something very interesting happened in 689 AD. The Dome of Rock was completed in 689 AD, or it was started rather in 689 AD. The way that I see that is it's God giving us a sign pointing back to say he will have reign for 42 months. And so from 689 AD all the way up to 1967, the Muslims had absolute control over the Temple Mount that was in Jerusalem. And in 1967, that ended. And so it's very interesting to me, but it gets even more interesting to me that Daniel's looking forward. He says, from the time the daily sacrifice is abolished and the abomination that causes desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days. Now, I've seen a lot of, and I've done it myself, where I've tried to fit that into the 3.5-year mark, the 1,290 days, but it's like 1,270 if you do the math, or it's 1,200 if you run it on a Gregorian or lunar. It's not 1,290 days. So there's a little bit of speculation. Again, remember I said this is the way I understand it. I'm willing to be corrected, and if you have that, my email is daveglander@rforh.com. I'd love to have a conversation with you. But this is the way that I understand it better. Jeremiah talks about this. Talks about when they were taken into captivity. He said, so Judah went into captivity away from her land. This is the number of people Nebuchadnezzar carried into exile in the 7th year. 3,023 Jews. In Nebuchadnezzar's 18th year, 832 more. And in his 23rd year, 745 were taken into exile, total of 4,600 people. So in the 23rd year, we're looking for a marker, and we know that the Babylonian captivity began in 606 BC. So I know it's plus 23 years, but we're going backwards, remember, because we're starting from, the BC is running from 4,000 down to 0, or technically down to 1, and then it starts back at 1 again, and then we go 180, and then we start counting up. So when we add, we're actually subtracting. So if you take the 23 years that the Babylonian captivity started in 606, you end up with 583 BC. That's when the sacrifices were abolished, because there were no people left in Jerusalem. 360 biblical calendar years, again, we have to divide by our Gregorian calendar in order for us to understand this, is 365.25. You end up with 0.9857 solar years per thing. So if you take 1,290 days, which is what God was saying, that he will be there for 1,290 days, and you times that by 0.9857, and I want you to get your calculators out and do this yourself, because I'm not making this up. That's 1,271 solar years. Well, here's the interesting thing. If 1,271 solar years minus 583 BC, and then what you have to do is you have to add 1, because it didn't go from 1,271 or 583 BC down to 0 and start from 0 and go up. We went to 1 BC, and then we started in 1 AD. So you've got to add a 1 to get that curvature right there. So 1,271 minus 583 plus 1, you come up with 689 AD, exactly the way that John had seen it going backwards in time, right? All of a sudden now you've seen it going forwards in time. And so you get this point where you get down to the Dome of Rock being established on 689 AD, fits both of those prophecies very well. Then the angel said to me, why are you astonished? I will explain to you the mystery of the woman and the beast she rides, which has 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast which you saw, now this is important, and it's not funny to me or ironic. I see this in Scripture all the time, where there's models who once was, now is not, and will come up. Revelation 4:8, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. It's the same type of thing. He once was, now is not. And remember when John is writing, right? He once was, now is not, and will come up out of the abyss to his destruction. That's Revelation chapter 17. We go over to Revelation chapter 13, and he confirms this. He said, and I saw a beast coming up out of the sea. He had 10 horns and 7 heads, and the 10 crowns on his horns. Each one had a blasphemous name. So he's talking about the same beast here. So when we begin to break this down, we go over to Revelation chapter 17 again, and it's funny, because the angel's talking to John like, hey, look, this is not that hard to figure out. It's a matter of how studious are you with your time that you spend in the Scriptures. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are the 7 hills on which the woman sits. They are also 7 kings. Here's where you have to pay close attention when he's describing the 7 kings or kingdoms. 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other one has not yet come, but when he does come, he must remain for a little while. The beast who once was and now is an 8th king, and he belongs to the 7 and is going about his destruction. So he's talking about these 7 kingdoms, that 5 have fallen, 1 is, 1's yet to come, remain for a little while. When he comes back up, he's actually technically going to be an 8th king, but he's a part of the 7th. So there's an 8th kingdom that we're looking at that was a part of the 7th. So you got to tie all that together. We're going to do that by doing this. Here's the criteria for the 7 kingdoms. It's very specific criteria, and it's very simple. 1, they have to be a successor of the kingdom that conquered. They have to be the ones who shut down the kingdom that was before them. And when you have Egypt and Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and then you have Roman Empire, those are all kingdoms that shut down the kingdoms before them. They also have to have gained control of Jerusalem in the process. Remember, we started this whole thing off by saying Jerusalem is a cup of trembling, right? So Jerusalem is where you always want to keep your eye on to make sure that you know what's going on. So they have to be the successor of the kingdom that it conquered, and it has to gain control of Jerusalem, and it did. So here's the criteria for the 7 kings fulfilled. 5 have fallen. And remember, John is in that day, he's talking about Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece, because he's living in the Roman time. So the 5 major kingdoms of the world have already fallen. The one that is very simple to John. He's living in it. He's living in the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire was known to have Rome and Constantinople. It had 2 wings. Well, the Western or the Roman and Rome ended in September 4th, 476. The other kingdom lasted quite a bit longer up until the Eastern Roman Empire ended in May 29th, 1943. That's when the fulfillment of the Roman kingdom, that's why John said this beast was so enormous, because it lasted so long. It lasted nearly 1,000 years of Roman rule. Well, after the 1,000 years were over, remember, one has yet to come, because John's writing in that time, he says, one's yet to come. Who is it that overthrow Rome? I'm glad you asked. Here's your question. Here's your answer. Islamic first jihad overthrew Rome and tackled everything, gaining all of that and spreading bigger than any kingdom that had ever been before it, and ruled for hundreds of years over in that area. So if we're looking at the criteria of what is the 7th kingdom, the 7th kingdom has to be the Islamic jihad that went before that took over all of that area. Now here's where it gets pretty interesting. It's called for a mind with wisdom, the 7 heads or 7 hills in which the woman sits. Well, here's Rome, and there are 7 hills in Rome. And it's interesting that could be one of the locations, but what I think shuts it down just a little bit is the fact that those 7 hills are within Rome's boundaries, but right outside of that, there's actually a few more hills, so it kind of fits and it kind of doesn't fit. But what does fit really well is modern-day Istanbul. It has 7 distinct hills, and it used to be Constantinople until it was shut down just not that long ago, a few hundred years ago, when the Islamic jihadists took over that. So when we take those 7 hills of Rome, here's what is interesting, but also kind of makes me a little mad. So if you go to New York City right now, right above the location of where Tower 1 is, or the big tower that replaced the World Trade Centers, there's one of the largest mosques in the country there, because what Muslims do is when they conquer a war or a battle, in the place where they won the war or the battle, they'll usually knock down what was there before it and build a temple, or a mosque rather, on top of that as a monument to their win. And so remember, Constantinople was under Roman rule in the eastern portion of it. When the Islamic jihadists won, they come in, and the first thing they do is on top Copy Hill, they put a palace there. And there's a giant palace that actually holds part of the museum for Muhammad's, I think there's like a beard hair in there or something. I mean, if I ever get to the point where like I have a beard here in a museum, you'll know I've arrived. So that's the first hill, is Topkapi Place. The next one is the Nurosaminia Mosque. That's on the second hill. The third hill is the Solomania Mosque, and again, another mosque where they have built on top of a hill that they succeeded. The fourth hill has a faith mosque on there, and these things are beautiful. The fifth hill has the Yavaz Sultan Selim Mosque on there, and then he built his daughter a mosque on the Miriam Sultan Mosque. He built his daughter, and on the seventh hill you have the Koko Mustafa Pasha Mosque. What's interesting about this mosque is it's one of the only mosques that actually used to be a Byzantine church, and you can actually see those features in there. And so Constantinople, now Istanbul, is a city that sits on 7 hills, and as I've already talked about before, Turkey plays a massive role in all the nations that are listed in the Ezekiel war, the Ezekiel 38 and 39 war, as the outer circle that's going to finally have a say in all of this that's going on. The beast which was, and which you saw once was, now is not, will come up out of the abyss. This is what, again, I'm just telling you the best way I understand this. The caliphate was the ruling, governing thing of the Muslim doctrine, the Muslim governments, the body of Islam, from 632 AD, when it was established. Abu Bakr was the first caliph. Okay, so that is what truly rules Islam, and it once was, but it now is not, because on March 23rd, 1924, the first president of the Turkish Republic, Mustafa, that dude, as part of his reforms, constitutionally abolished the institution of the caliphate. And so in 1924, when John's talking about it, it now is not. The caliphate doesn't exist. Well, here's the whole thing. The caliphate has the leader, Abu Bakr was the first one, as the caliph over the caliphate. He's the pope, if you will. Right now, Islam's running on a system where they don't have a pope. It would be like taking the pope out of Catholicism and saying you don't have the Vatican rule. They would be going crazy. Well, I want you to reverse the calendar just a few years back to something known as the Arab Spring. And the Arab Spring, which went through Libya and Egypt and Sudan and all these different places, where Islam revolting against their governing bodies because they were trying to reestablish the caliphate. They were like, we don't have a pope. We need a leader. We need a caliph to tell us how to sort these things out between the difference between Sunni and Shia and all that stuff. We need a governing body. And so there was this massive movement trying to do it. Well, what most people don't know, and I freaked out because I was actually giving a talk on this the day it happened. I leave, after giving a talk on this, I leave, turn on the radio, and ISIS had reestablished the caliphate. ISIS reestablished the caliphate. And at first I was like, that can't be because it's got to be out of Turkey. It's got to be out of Turkey. There's no way this thing's going to last. I remember wrestling with that in the car. Well, here's the crazy thing. The first guy that they appoint as a caliph, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Abu Bakr was the first caliph. This guy assumes the name association with it, and he's Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. And of course, they end up taking him out. He's no longer here, thank God. I mean, I hate to say thank God about somebody dying, but when you have somebody that evil, it's just we need to call evil evil. And so when I saw that, I was like, there's no way. Well, since then, since those years have passed, the caliphate by ISIS has demolished itself. It's no longer there because I'm telling you, it has to come back through the association with Turkey because of the main role that Turkey plays. I want to show you something interesting about the European Union, and I'll kind of go someplace and maybe you'll follow with me and maybe you'll disagree. But Europa is riding this beast, this bull, in their tradition of Europe on how Europe was saved back in the day and established back in the day. And Europa was being carried off by this massive beast. And it's even on their magazines. Out in front of Brussels in their Council of Ministries, you have this sculpture of this woman who's riding this beast. And if you'll notice, she's holding the flag with the stars around her head. You see the stars on the coins. I mean, is that, I'm going to pose it as a question more than anything else, could that be a direct sign or a direct link about the woman who rides the beast? Because it is, in my humble opinion, I think that the beast is going to come from Rome, but we're going to talk about that in a second. This is the first president of the Council of Europe, Paul Henry Spack, said this, and it should make this is coming from a quote from David Jeremiah's book, should make your skin crawl. He says this, he goes, "We do not want another committee. We have too many already. What we want is a man of sufficient stature to hold the allegiance of all people and to lift us out of this economic morass in which we are sinking. Send us such a man, and be he God or the devil, we will receive him." That's a direct quote from the first leader of the Council of Europe, the European Union. He's basically saying, like, we don't even care who this is. We're in such turmoil. We need help to get out of this. And so the reason why I want to come back and say, I think the woman who rides the beast, and now here, listen, pause, time. I need you to really hear me loud and clear. And I'm actually glad this is being recorded so that way you can go back and listen to my words. I don't have a single problem with Catholics, individual Catholics. I honestly know some individual Catholics who are on fire, Jesus freaks. They are. They're truly, sometimes they make me look like I'm not studied enough because of how much they're in their word. But for the most part, the majority of Catholicism doesn't necessarily pick up the word and read it. They get the word straight from the Vatican that goes straight down through the systems, and they get it in their bulletin every week, and they're told a passage, and then they're told how to interpret the passage, and that's about as much knowledge as they have on that. And I know that directly because I have some Catholic friends who we've talked about reading the Bible, and they said it's not necessary. We get our word, which is the model that Catholicism has had since it started, is that the Vatican would distribute what the people needed to know about the Word of God, which is where the Great Reformation came from, because they turned around and said, hey, we don't want your version of it. We want to be able to read it for ourselves. And so be very careful what you hear me saying in the next few words, because what I want you to understand, I don't have a problem with Catholics, I have a problem with the body of Catholicism. And as I showed you in that video a couple series ago about the Pope signing a treaty for human rights that basically molds Islam, Christianity, and Judaism into one bowl, Pope Francis, because I believe that the Pope is going to play a massive role in the assistance of the Antichrist. Not that the Pope is the Antichrist. That's what a lot of people have said. So what I'm saying is actually not as bad. They were saying the Pope will be the Antichrist because he comes from Rome. I don't think the Pope's coming, the Antichrist is coming from Rome. I want to show you a couple of pictures of why I'm talking about this. This is the Pope literally getting down and kissing the feet of different sheiks that are around. Now, I'm sorry, but we as Christians, we don't bow down to anybody else. We bow down to the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings, and that's it. And we don't succumb to, I was in a region of the world, and I won't say where, and people would bow down to the leaders, and I just would shake their hand and try and give them a hug. I'm not going to bow down to anybody except for my Lord and my Savior. And so this example of the Pope getting down and kissing the feet of these leaders who are diametrically opposed to our worldview is sickening to me. But what it's doing is it's setting up that woman, Rome, which I think why those 7 hills are unique in Rome, because I think Constantinople / Istanbul is the city. But I also think Rome has that close allegiance to it because I think that's the woman who rides the beast. Now, I want to show you something very interesting. This is Dubai in 1990. Dubai in 1990 was a desert. There was literally nothing there. This is Dubai in 2008. It's taking on a tremendous growth. At one point, 70% of all of the cranes in the entire world were all in Dubai at the same time, building this massive city that's come up out of nowhere in no time flat. This is a modern picture of it. That city came out of nowhere very, very quickly. And what's crazy about that city is this. This is what used to be Burj Dubai. They call it Burj Fatima or something like that. They've named it after somebody, but the original name when it was built was Burj Dubai. This is the beginning of Burj Dubai. And I'm just saying, I don't know if this means anything or not, but the real famous picture of Babylon, the Tower of Babel, the resemblance there is just uncanny to me. Again, I don't know if that has anything to do with anything. I just know this. However, Burj Dubai was and is currently, and won't be for long, and I'll show you that, the tallest building in the world. It is massive. When I say massive, I mean on a monumental structure. There's its height compared to any other building in the world. And it's just, again, could this be a sign? I keep posing questions, if you'll notice that, because again, I don't want to die on any hill. Could this be a sign that this is the modern Babylon that John was talking about in the book of Revelation? Because I don't think it's going to be in Iraq where it was before. Iraq doesn't really have a whole lot going on to fit the model of it. But let's continue. This is Burj Al. I just don't get it. This is what Burj Dubai is going to look like after it's built. Here's the comparison. Al Burj compared to every other build, and this is in the works. It blows my mind when I see these things, but I'm not even done yet. This is crazy. This is going to be this tower that is being built that's actually taller than Al Burj, and they haven't started on Al Burj yet. But this is, and remember where I told you though the Abrahamic Family Faith Center is going to be, is in Abu Dhabi, which is the capital of Dubai. That's where all this stuff is going on. There's the foundation that's being set for this building. It is, the top of the tower will have an oval shaped featuring 10 observation decks that include 2 garden decks, which are designed on the lines of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which was one of the 7 wonders of the world. They're even incorporating the Hanging Gardens of Babylon on top of this thing. It blows my mind. Again, could this be a reference point to the beast coming out of the sea? Because they're literally making man-made islands. The one on the bottom left is called the world. And they're literally making man-made islands all over the place. Look at this shot. There's some of the buildings that are in progress right now. Here's a big picture of the coastline. All of that is coming up out of the sea and being built into neighborhoods that are growing up out of. Why do they have all of this land? Why do they have to come up and make these? I mean, I guess it's pretty cool. They're they're all islands. Like you can own your own island in Dubai, but all these islands put together, the palm trees, the world, all this stuff is coming up. This is the largest hotel in the world. It's absolutely beautiful. They built their own indoor largest ski resort. Look, this is an inside ski resort. I mean, Dubai is going crazy when it comes to building all of this stuff so fast. And I want to show you something interesting about its location, because you have Hong Kong, London, and New York are the three economic capitals of the world as it sits. And here's where Dubai sits, right in the midst of all of them. Right in the midst of all of them, you have this economic capital that's being built right there. And if you ask certain people, the reason why Dubai is being built so fast is because they're preparing it for the Antichrist to come. The merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her, because no one buys their cargoes anymore. Cargoes of gold, and pay attention at the bottom, gold, silver, and precious stones, and pearls, fine linen, purple, silk, scarlet cloth. There's all of these different things that are mentioned that are part of the import and export rather of Dubai that kind of fit really well with that Revelation verse right there. And again, I'm trying to point out signs to help us navigate through all of this stuff. And I want to start to close this section of it off by sharing with you something that's of vital importance. Because as you can see by now, I'm pretty convinced that the Antichrist is going to be Islamic. And in the next series, I'm going to tell you exactly why I believe that. But I want to show you this. This is in America. These are Islamic compounds in the United States. And if you'll notice, there's two in the state that I live in, which is Georgia. And there's two in California, which is where I'm at right now. They're all over. There's three in New York. They're all over the place. And these Islamic compounds are here as terrorist training grounds. The hijackers, two of the hijackers that flew the planes into the World Trade Centers, took part in training at an airport that was right down. I've actually took off and landed from Briscoe Field before. It's in Lawrenceville, Georgia. It's from CNN. Hijackers took practice flights at suburban Atlanta Airport. I mean, they're here amongst us. And this is talking about the camp that is literally right up the road from my house. I've driven past this camp before. It's in Commerce, Georgia, and there's a white truck with three guys who sit in the front of it, single cab trucks, an old truck. And if you drive by too slow and look at them too long, they follow you, and they will follow you for miles until they're convinced you're not coming back. And so I've been asked the question, if we know these are Islamic training grounds that hold military events to train jihadists, why doesn't the government shut them down? And the answer is crazy. The same Second Amendment that protects me and you protects them as well. Somebody within their organization is an American citizen through and through, and that person has the Second Amendment rights to do whatever. We can hold military training type things ourselves on our land if we want to. That's our constitutional right. They're American citizens. They can do the same. No matter what their cause may be, they can do the same thing. And so it's a little eye-opening when you realize that, man, there's terrorist training grounds here in America ready to take over when that call comes through.
Palestine will be free! Shame on you! 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 Child killer! Children killer! Shame on you! Shame on you! Children killer! Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame on you!
That was in my backyard. That was in downtown Atlanta. I was there for a Christian Stands with Israel rally, and there was about 300 or 400 Christians and Jewish people that were gathered together. And across the street, the Palestinians had organized about 1,200 of them. And at the end, the cops were trying to break up the yelling back and forth across the street and stuff. And so to do so, they marched the Palestinians down the street, which I was like, oh, great, now you've just given them a parade. That's wonderful. So I wanted to document it, and I'm standing there just filming, normal. And I don't know if they had seen me on the other side of the street, or because I had gone over to their side and I was trying to get interviews. And the crazy part was on the Jewish Christian side, they were more than willing to give interviews. You go over to the Islamic side and they refused to have a camera on them. They would not talk. So I did talk to some of them about some different stuff. It's a different topic for a different time. But I wanted to document the parade going down, so I came down and I was filming until I hit this point where I had to come over and get a little bit closer to where they were at. And this guy with a child on his shoulders is calling me a child killer as he's taking the child and pushing the child's butt into me. And now that's ironic, but what if I had been one of those people who, man, you get in my space and I'm throwing punches? He's putting a child into my face, into my space, calling me a child killer, and shame on me. This was in my home. This wasn't across the seas or anything. This is happening right here. And so who is the Antichrist? I don't know his name, but I'm pretty sure he's Islamic. And if you want to find out why I'm pretty darn sure about that, tune in to next time when we talk about that in part 2. In the meantime, I'm Dave Glander with Reasons for Hope. Have an awesome day, my friend.